On June 16, 1944, the U.S. judicial system set a real record. On this day, the youngest criminal of the 20th century, George Stinney, was executed. At the time of the execution, the teenager was 14 years old. This case gained real worldwide fame in 2014, when 70 years later, the executed minor was posthumously acquitted. Alcolu is a small town in South Carolina. In 1944, it was divided into two halves by railroad tracks. One part was inhabited by black citizens and the other by whites. On March 23rd, two white girls, Emma Thames, 8 years old, and Betty June Binnicker, 11 years old, went for a walk in the black neighborhood. The girlfriends never returned home, but there were witnesses who claimed to have seen the missing children talking to 14-year-old George Stinney near his home. The entire town began searching for the girls immediately after their disappearance. The bodies were found in a ditch filled with dirty water. The cause of death in both cases was a head injury incompatible with life. George Stinney was arrested on suspicion of committing this crime. The teenager came under suspicion because the girls were last seen with him. Initially, the accusation was based on this argument. The news of an African American being suspected of murdering two white children stirred up the quiet town. Threats from local residents began to come in against the entire Stinney family. George's relatives literally fled the city, afraid of possible reprisals, and were forced to abandon the boy to his fate. The suspect received a tax commissioner, who was going to enter the civil service as a lawyer. According to some sources, George Stinney confessed to committing the double murder and attempting to rape the older girl. However, there are no official documents confirming this testimony. The trial lasted less than 3 hours, which is already strange for such a serious charge. The doctors who conducted the examinations of the bodies and the person who found them were called as witnesses. Despite the fact that the defendant was black, there was not a single African American among the jurors. They were all white. No witnesses were called for the defense either. Moreover, there is reason to believe that the lawyer worked negligently. The verdict was delivered in literally 10 minutes. The jury deliberated briefly and came to the conclusion that George Stinney was guilty and deserved the death penalty. According to eyewitnesses, the teenager listened to the verdict, visibly nervous. The Stinney family did not have the necessary financial means to re-examine the case. The sentence was carried out just 3 months after it was passed. At that time, South Carolina, like many other states in America, was a place where the death penalty was carried out by electric chair. The 14-year-old teenager was so short that he was not even grown for this terrible device. The straps for fixing his hands were hopelessly large for him, so his limbs had to be simply tied. And in order to properly seat George, they put the Bible that he had brought with him on the seat. The execution took place on June 16, 1944, and over time, this whole story began to be forgotten even in Alcolu. In 2013, the case of George Stinney interested some American historians. At the same time, the family of the executed teenager began to look for ways to rehabilitate the honor of their deceased relative. Catherine Stinney, George's sister, hired a whole team of lawyers to challenge the court decision made 70 years ago. Initially, the judges did not want to take on this case, since there were practically no witnesses and eyewitnesses of that trial left alive. There's also little documentation in the archive, and what is important, there is no confession from George himself among the documents. And yet the case was indeed retried. It was possible to prove that several serious violations were committed in the investigation and trial. The defendant did not have a normal defense, and the evidence of his guilt does not look convincing enough. George Stinney's acquittal brought significant relief to his family. Of course, no court can bring a teenager back to life, but even posthumous rehabilitation means a lot to the relatives of the convicted person and their descendants. The second trial even found a witness for the defense. This was a man who shared a cell with Stinney, who was sentenced to death. He said that George himself tried to talk to him several times about how he had been wrongly convicted. The court's acquittal astonished the entire world community. Indeed, it is not every day that those executed in the electric chair are found innocent. Posthumously, George Stinney became a real celebrity. Several documentaries have been made about him, the most famous of which is Charles Burnett's 83 Days. And in 1988, the book Carolina Skeletons was written. Its author, journalist, and writer David Stout presents the details of the Stinney case in the format of a work of fiction. Curiously, the main character of the novel turns out to be innocent. This work was later filmed with the original title preserved.